Abandoned on a dusty trail with nothing but crumbs and a broken heart, a young girl's life changes when a stranger stops where others passed by. Will this be her salvation, or just another fleeting promise? Join us in this Wild West tale of hope and heart. The Nebraska prairie stretched endless under a sky heavy with the threat of dusk, its grasses brittle and gold, swaying like a weary lullaby. Dust clung to the air, kicked up by a wagon's wheels long gone, their tracks fading into the horizon. In the middle of a rutted trail, a girl of 10 sat alone, her bare feet caked with dirt, her knees hugged tight to her chest. Her name was Callie, though no one had spoken it in days. Her hair, a pale blonde streaked with grime, hung in loose tangles, framing a face too sharp for her years. Her gray eyes, dry but fierce, stared at the crumbs in her palm, the last gift from a family that wasn't hers. They'd fed her, kissed her brow, and left her like a stone discarded by the road. She didn't cry. Tears were for those who believed someone would come back. Callie knew better. The family, bound by necessity not blood, had seen her as a burden, an extra mouth in a world of scarce harvests. She wore a patched dress of faded brown muslin, its hem frayed, too short for her lanky frame. A thin scar, barely healed, curved along her right wrist, a mark from a switch when she'd dared ask for more bread. She counted pebbles in the dirt, naming them like friends: jasper, flint, rose. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in hues of amber and bruised purple, and still she sat, waiting for nothing. The prairie was quiet, save for the hum of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. Callie's stomach growled, a hollow ache she'd learned to ignore. She tucked the crumbs into her pocket, saving them for when hunger became unbearable. Her fingers brushed a small, smooth stone she'd kept since spring, her only treasure, cool against her skin. She didn't pray for rescue. She'd seen too many wagons pass without slowing. Instead, she whispered to the stone, "We'll be all right," as if it could answer. Then a sound broke the stillness, the steady clop of hooves, unhurried, deliberate. Callie's head snapped up, her body tensing like a deer scenting danger. A rider appeared against the fading light, his silhouette tall and broad atop a chestnut mare. He wasn't like the drifters she'd seen, ragged and desperate. His coat, a deep green wool, was clean, his boots polished despite the dust. He stopped a few paces away, his horse snorting softly. The man's face was weathered, lined by years under open skies, with dark blue eyes that held a quiet weight. His hair, brown with threads of gray, was tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. This was Cyrus Dalton, though Callie didn't know it yet. "You alone out here?" he asked, his voice low, carrying the gravel of a man who spoke little but meant every word. Callie didn't answer, her eyes flicking to the trail behind him, searching for others. Cyrus leaned forward in the saddle, studying her. "You got a name?" "Callie," she said, barely audible, her grip tightening on the stone in her pocket. He nodded as if that was enough. "You hungry, Callie?" She hesitated, then gave a small nod, her pride warring with her hunger. Cyrus reached into a leather satchel tied to his saddle, pulling out a cloth-wrapped bundle. He tossed it gently, and it landed near her feet, a biscuit still warm and a small apple, its skin a dull red. Callie stared at it, her mouth watering, but didn't move. Kindness was a trap she'd learned to distrust. "It's yours," Cyrus said, his tone steady, not coaxing. "No strings." Callie's fingers trembled as she picked up the biscuit, breaking off a piece and tasting it. The buttery warmth was unlike anything she'd known in months. She ate slowly, her eyes never leaving Cyrus, who stayed mounted, giving her space. He didn't ask why she was there, didn't press for her story. Instead, he waited, his horse shifting beneath him, the prairie stretching vast and silent around them. A stranger's kindness lights a spark in Callie's lonely world, but where will this trail lead her? Stay with us to find out. The Nebraska dusk deepened into a velvet night, stars piercing the sky like scattered coins. Callie clung to the saddle, her small hands gripping the horn as Cyrus Dalton's chestnut mare plodded steadily along the trail, her blonde hair, tangled and pale, caught the moonlight, and her gray eyes darted to every shadow cast by the cottonwood trees lining the path. The brown muslin dress hung loose on her frame, its frayed hem brushing her bare ankles. The scar on her wrist itched, a reminder of a life she'd left behind. The apple Cyrus gave her rested in her pocket, its weight a quiet promise she wasn't ready to trust. She didn't speak and Cyrus didn't press her, his silence as steady as the rhythm of hooves on packed earth. Cyrus rode ahead, his green wool coat blending into the dark, his broad shoulders a shield against the unknown. His brown hair streaked with gray peeked from under his hat, and his blue eyes scanned the trail with a vigilance that felt protective, not predatory. The mare snorted, steam rising from its nostrils, and Callie's fingers tightened. She'd never ridden before, and the sway of the saddle felt like a boat on a restless sea. Yet Cyrus's calm presence kept her anchored, his occasional glance back wordless but reassuring. The trail curved upward, climbing a low ridge where the prairie gave way to a valley below. Callie caught her breath as a house came into view, its silhouette soft against the starlit sky. It wasn't grand, but it was solid. A 2-story clapboard home with a sloped roof, a single chimney, and a porch that wrapped around like an embrace. A whitewashed fence circled a small yard where a windmill creaked faintly in the breeze. Beyond it, a barn loomed, its doors shut tight, and a corral held 2 horses, their heads bowed in sleep. Lanterns hung by the porch, their glow casting pools of gold on the packed dirt. It was a place that felt lived in, not abandoned, a stark contrast to the shacks Callie had known. Cyrus reined in the mare, dismounting with a practiced ease. He turned to Callie, his hands steady as he lifted her down, mindful of her bare feet on the cold ground. "This is home," he said, his voice low but firm, like a vow. Callie's eyes widened, her breath hitching. She'd never heard the word home spoken with such certainty. He led her to the porch, the boards creaking under his boots. Callie followed, her steps hesitant, clutching the apple in her pocket as if it might vanish. Cyrus pushed open the door, revealing a warm interior, lit by a single oil lamp. The room was sparse but tidy. A wooden table with 3 chairs, a cast-iron stove, a shelf lined with tin plates and a few leather-bound books. A braided rug lay by the hearth, where embers glowed faintly. The air smelled of cedar and faintly of bread, a comfort Callie hadn't known she craved. "Pick a place to rest," Cyrus said, hanging his hat on a peg. "Upstairs, second door on the left. Blankets are in the chest." He didn't hover, didn't watch her every move. Instead, he crossed to the stove, stirring a pot of stew that filled the room with a savory warmth. Callie stood frozen, her bare toes curling against the floor. She wasn't used to choices, only commands. She climbed the narrow stairs, each step a test of courage. The second room was small, with a slanted ceiling and a single window framing the stars. A bed stood against the wall, its mattress covered by a patchwork quilt in shades of blue and cream. Callie ran her fingers over it, the fabric soft, unpatched. A wooden chest sat at the foot, and she opened it to find wool blankets, neatly folded. She pulled one out, wrapping it around her shoulders, its weight grounding her. Downstairs, Cyrus set a bowl of stew on the table, its steam curling in the lamplight. Callie returned, the blanket trailing behind her like a cape. She sat, her eyes flicking to the bowl, then to Cyrus, who nodded once. She ate slowly, the warmth spreading through her, each bite a question she didn't dare ask. Why me? Why here? Cyrus didn't fill the silence with words, only the quiet clink of his spoon against his own bowl. When she finished, he stood, clearing the table. "Sleep when you're ready," he said. "Door locks if you need it." Callie's eyes widened at the offer of safety, a luxury she'd never known. She nodded, clutching the blanket tighter, and slipped back upstairs, the apple still in her pocket, uneaten. Callie finds shelter in a stranger's home, but can she trust this new beginning? What lies beyond the warmth of this house? Keep watching. The Nebraska dawn broke soft and golden, sunlight spilling through the clapboard house's upstairs window, warming the quilt draped over Callie's shoulders. She stirred, her blonde hair a pale halo against the pillow, her gray eyes blinking against the light. The scar on her wrist, A faint crescent caught the sun as she sat up, the bed creaking under her slight frame. Her brown muslin dress, now washed and hung to dry, had been replaced by a borrowed shirt. Cream cotton, too big, its sleeves rolled to her elbows. The apple from Cyrus's satchel sat on the bedside table, uneaten, beside the smooth stone she'd carried for months. For the first time in years, Callie woke without fear, though trust still felt like a fragile thread. Downstairs, the scent of sizzling bacon drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the faint tang of coffee. Callie padded barefoot across the cool floorboards, her steps cautious as if testing the house's promise of safety. Cyrus Dalton stood by the stove, his green wool coat draped over a chair, his brown hair gray at the temples, catching the morning light. His blue eyes flicked to her as she entered, steady but kind. He wore a gray vest over a white shirt, the sleeves rolled up, his broad, heavy-set frame filling the small space. "Sleep all right?" he asked, sliding a plate of eggs and bacon onto the table. Callie nodded, settling into a chair, her hands clasped tight in her lap. She ate slowly, savoring the warmth, her eyes darting to Cyrus as he poured coffee into a tin mug. He didn't ask about her past, didn't probe the silence she wore like armor. Instead, he set a glass of milk beside her plate, its creaminess a luxury she'd never known. "Got work outside today," he said, his voice a low drawl. "You can stay here, or come along, your choice." The word choice startled her. She wasn't used to it, only to orders barked by hands too quick with a switch. "I'll come," she said, her voice small but firm. Cyrus nodded, no judgment, no pressure, and cleared the table with a quiet efficiency that felt like respect. Outside, the prairie air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and wild clover. The ranch sprawled modest but sturdy, a barn with fresh hay, a corral where horses snorted, a garden patch with rows of beans and turnips. Cyrus led her to a wooden shed, its shelves lined with tools, shovels, rakes, a coil of rope. He handed her a small spade, its handle worn smooth. "We're fixing the garden fence," he said. "Rabbits keep sneaking in." Callie followed him to the garden, her bare feet sinking into the soft earth. Cyrus showed her how to dig a post hole, his hands steady as he drove a stake into the ground. She mimicked him, her movements clumsy but earnest, the spade heavy in her small hands. When she faltered, he didn't scold, only adjusted her grip with a gentle nudge. "You're learning," he said, and the words landed like a gift. As the sun climbed higher, Callie's shoulders ached. But she didn't stop. She wanted to prove she could belong, that she wasn't just a stray. Cyrus watched her, his expression unreadable but soft. At noon, he handed her a canteen of water, its metal cool against her lips. "You got a last name, Callie?" he asked, leaning against a fence post. She froze, the canteen halfway to her mouth. "Don't know," she said, her voice barely, above a whisper. "They never gave me one." Cyrus's eyes softened, a flicker of understanding passing through them. "Names matter out here," he said. "They're what you carry when the world tries to take everything else. You want one?" Callie's breath caught. A name wasn't just a word. It was a claim, a place. "Can I have yours?" she asked, her voice trembling. He paused, then nodded. "Dalton's mine. It's yours if you want it." The name settled over her like a warm cloak, heavy, but right. Callie Dalton. She repeated it silently, tasting its strength. Cyrus didn't smile, but his hand rested briefly on her shoulder, a gesture that felt like a vow. They worked until dusk, the fence standing straighter, the garden safer. Callie's hands were blistered, but she felt taller, as if the name had given her roots. That night she sat by the hearth, the quilt from her bed draped over her knees. Cyrus stoked the fire, the flames casting shadows across his weathered face. "You did good today," he said, his voice quiet. Callie clutched the stone in her pocket, its smoothness a comfort. She didn't know how to thank him, not yet, but the silence between them felt like enough. Callie takes a new name and a new purpose, but what shadows linger beyond the ranch? Don't miss what's next. The Nebraska sun rose fierce, its light spilling over the ranch like a promise kept. Callie stood in the yard, her blonde hair tied back with a scrap of twine, its pale strands gleaming against the faded cream shirt she wore, its sleeves still, rolled to her elbows. Her gray eyes, once wary, now held a quiet determination, though the scar on her wrist reminded her of shadows not yet forgotten. The brown muslin dress hung in her room, replaced by sturdy trousers, borrowed from Cyrus's stores cinched with a leather cord. Her bare feet were now shod in small boots, scuffed but warm, a gift Cyrus had left by her bed without a word. The stone in her pocket, smooth and familiar, was her anchor as she faced the day. Cyrus Dalton moved through the morning with purpose, his green wool coat slung over the porch rail, his gray vest unbuttoned over a white shirt. His brown hair, streaked with gray, was swept back, his blue eyes scanning the horizon as he sharpened a hoe by the barn. His heavy-set frame cast a long shadow, steady and unyielding, like the cottonwoods that lined the creek beyond the corral. He glanced at Callie, noting the way she stood taller, her shoulders less hunched. "We're planting today," he said, his drawl calm but expectant. "Corn and potatoes. You ready?" Callie nodded, her hands tightening around the spade she'd used to mend the fence. She followed Cyrus to the garden where the earth was turned and waiting, its rich scent rising under the sun. He showed her how to space the seeds, his fingers pressing them into the soil with a care that felt almost sacred. Callie knelt beside him, mimicking his movements, her hands clumsy but earnest. When a seed slipped, she froze, expecting a sharp word, but Cyrus only handed her another. "Takes time," he said. "You'll get it." The hours passed in a rhythm of work. Dig, plant, cover, repeat. Callie's boots sank into the dirt, her face flushed with effort, a smudge of soil on her cheek. She didn't complain, driven by a need to prove she belonged, that the name Dalton wasn't just a loan. Cyrus watched her, his expression soft but guarded, as if measuring her strength against the weight of the world. At midday they rested under a lone oak, its branches casting dappled shade. Cyrus handed her a canteen and a slice of cornbread, wrapped in cloth, its edges crisp from the oven. Callie ate, her eyes drifting to the corral, where a young sorrel pony grazed, its mane glinting red in the sun. "That one's yours," Cyrus said, following her gaze. "If you stay, name her what you like." Callie's breath caught, her fingers brushing the stone in her pocket. "Mine?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She'd never owned anything, not even her name until now. "Yours," Cyrus said, his tone final. "Horses need care same as people. You up for it?" She nodded, a spark igniting in her gray eyes. After lunch, Cyrus led her to the corral, showing her how to brush the pony's coat, how to check its hooves for stones. Callie's hands trembled at first, but the pony's calm eyes steadied her. She named it Clover, after the wild patches by the creek, a name that felt like hope. As dusk painted the sky in streaks of rose and gold, Callie and Cyrus sat on the porch, a jug of cider between them. "You're doing all right, Callie Dalton," he said, his voice warm like the firelight spilling from the house. She looked at him, searching for a catch, but found only truth. "Never had a place before," she said, her voice soft, the stone in her hand now warm from her grip. "What if I mess it up?" Cyrus leaned back, his eyes on the horizon. "You won't. You're learning what it means to stay." The words settled over her, heavy but welcome, like the quilt on her bed. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but for the first time, she wanted to find out. The ranch was quiet, save for the windmill's creak and Clover's distant whinny, a lullaby for a girl who was starting to believe in home. Callie's planting seeds of a new life, but will the past let her roots grow deep? What challenges await this fragile home? Keep watching. The Nebraska prairie shimmered under a late summer sky, its golden grasses swaying in a breeze that carried the scent of earth and hay. Callie stood in the corral, her blonde hair tied back with twine, its pale strands catching the sunlight. Her gray eyes, now brighter but still guarded, followed the sorrel pony, Clover, as it trotted in a lazy circle. The borrowed cream shirt hung loose on her frame, tucked into trousers cinched with a leather cord, her small boots scuffed from days of work. The scar on her wrist, a faint crescent, was less noticeable now, softened by time and care. In her pocket, the smooth stone and uneaten apple remained, talismans of a past she hadn't fully released. Cyrus Dalton leaned against the corral fence, his green wool coat folded over the rail, his gray vest unbuttoned over a white shirt. His brown hair, gray at the temples, was swept back, his blue eyes tracking Callie's movements with quiet pride. His heavy-set frame was steady, a bulwark against the world's uncertainties. He'd taught her to saddle Clover, to guide the pony with gentle reins, and now she rode with a tentative grace, her shoulders squared. "Keep your heels down," he called, his drawl warm but firm. Callie adjusted, a small smile breaking through her focus. Days had settled into a rhythm. Mornings in the garden, planting and weeding. Afternoons with Clover, learning to ride. Evenings by the hearth, where Cyrus read aloud from a worn book of poetry, his voice a low rumble that soothed Callie's restless heart. She'd begun to speak more, her words no longer whispers, though questions about her past stayed locked away. Cyrus never pried, his silence a gift that let her heal. The ranch felt like a world apart, its windmill creaking, its barn filled with the rustle of hay, its clapboard house a haven under the stars. One evening, as the sky burned orange over the valley, Callie brushed Clover in the corral, her hands steady on the pony's flank. Cyrus joined her, a tin mug of cider in hand, his boots soft on the dirt. "You're getting good," he said, leaning on the fence. "Clover trusts you." Callie paused, her fingers lingering on the brush. "Didn't think anything would," she said, her voice soft. "Not after—" She trailed off, but Cyrus didn't push. Instead, he handed her the mug, its warmth seeping into her hands. "Trust takes time," he said, "like planting. You sow, you wait, you don't give up." She nodded, sipping the cider, its tang sharp and sweet. The moment felt fragile, like a flame that could flicker out. But then, a new sound broke the quiet, the distant thud of hooves, heavy and purposeful. Callie tensed, her eyes darting to the trail that wound through the valley. Cyrus straightened, his hand resting on the knife at his belt, his gaze narrowing. A rider appeared, his silhouette stark against the sunset, dust trailing behind him like a warning. The man reined in at the fence, his horse snorting. He was lean, his face shadowed under a black hat, a red bandana tied loose around his neck. His coat, a faded brown duster, was streaked with dirt, and his eyes, cold and gray, fixed on Cyrus. "Cyrus Dalton?" he asked, his voice sharp as, "Flint, that's me," Cyrus said, stepping forward, his tone even but unyielding. Callie moved closer to him, her hand on Clover's mane, her heart pounding. "Name's Clay Beringer," the man said, dismounting with a predator's grace. "Got business with this land. Heard you're keeping it for someone who don't belong." Callie's breath caught, the word belong cutting deep. She gripped the brush tighter, her eyes flicking to Cyrus, who didn't flinch. "This land's mine," he said, his voice like iron. "And who's here stays here." Beringer's lips curled, a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see about that," he said, his gaze sliding to Callie, lingering too long. He tipped his hat, a mockery of courtesy, and swung back into the saddle, riding off into the dusk, his shadow long and menacing. Cyrus watched him go, his jaw tight. "Stay close tomorrow," he told Callie, his voice low. "He's not done." Callie nodded, her fingers brushing the stone in her pocket, its weight a reminder of what she'd survived. The ranch, once a haven, now felt like a fortress under siege. She looked at Cyrus, his broad frame a shield, and felt a flicker of courage. She wasn't alone anymore, but the fight was coming, and she'd need to stand tall. A stranger's threat casts a shadow over Callie's new home. Will she and Cyrus stand strong, or will the past tear it all away? Don't miss what's next. The Nebraska dawn rose sharp and clear, painting the prairie in a golden haze that softened the rugged hills beyond the ranch. Callie stood in the corral, her blonde hair braided tightly, its pale strands tucked beneath a straw hat too big for her small frame. Her gray eyes, once shadowed by fear, now held a quiet fire, fixed on the trail where Clay Beringer's dust had last lingered. She wore the borrowed cream shirt, sleeves rolled up, and trousers cinched with a leather cord, her scuffed boots planted firm in the dirt. The scar on her forearm, a faint crescent, was a badge of survival, and in her pocket the smooth stone and apple, still uneaten, grounded her resolve. Clover, her sorrel mare, snorted softly, sensing the tension in the air. Cyrus Dalton stood by the barn, his green wool coat draped over his shoulders, his gray vest unbuttoned, his brown hair streaked with gray, catching the early light. His blue eyes scanned the horizon, steady but sharp, his heavy-set frame a pillar of strength. A Colt revolver rested in a holster at his hip, its grip worn but polished, a relic of a life he'd left behind. He'd spent the morning checking the fence, his hands steady on the wire, but his gaze kept drifting to Callie, noting the way she stood taller, ready to defend what she'd claimed. The ranch was quiet, the windmill creaking, the garden lush with new corn shoots. But the peace felt fragile, like a glass jar before a storm. Callie brushed Clover's mane, her hands steady despite the knot in her chest. She'd heard Cyrus's warning about Beringer, felt the weight of his threat. "He'll come back," Cyrus had said the night before, his voice low by the hearth. "Men like him don't walk away." As noon burned overhead, the sound of hooves shattered the stillness. 3 riders, their shadows long and menacing. Callie froze, her hand tightening, on the brush. Cyrus stepped forward, his revolver glinting in the sun, his stance unyielding. The lead rider was Clay Beringer, his black hat tilted low, his red bandana stark against his faded brown duster. His gray eyes gleamed with malice, flanked by 2 men, broad, silent, their hands on holstered guns. "Dalton," Beringer called, reining in his horse. "Time's up. That land's mine by right. Hand it over and the girl can stay." Callie's heart pounded, the word girl a blade. She stepped beside Cyrus, her small frame dwarfed but defiant. "This is our home," she said, her voice clear, surprising even herself. "You got no claim here." Beringer laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You're nothing, kid. No blood, no name." Cyrus's hand rested on her shoulder, steadying her. "She's a Dalton," he said, his voice like thunder. "That's claim enough." The air crackled with tension, the riders shifting in their saddles. Callie's eyes darted to the barn where a pitchfork leaned against the wall. She didn't want to fight, but she wouldn't run. Not again. Cyrus raised a hand, his revolver still holstered. "Ride on, Beringer. This ends without blood if you go now." Beringer's smirk faded, his hand twitching toward his gun. But before he could draw, a new sound broke through, a boy's shout, high and fierce. From the garden, a child no older than 7 darted forward, his dark hair wild, his clothes patched. "Leave him alone," he yelled, clutching a stick like a sword. It was Micah, a runaway who'd wandered to the ranch days ago, fed and sheltered by Callie's quiet kindness. Callie's breath caught, fear and pride surging. "Micah, stay back," she called, but the boy stood firm, his eyes blazing. Beringer's men hesitated, unsettled by the child's defiance. Cyrus seized the moment, stepping forward, his voice cutting through the dust. "You're outnumbered by heart, Beringer. Go." Beringer's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking from Cyrus to Callie to Micah. He spat into the dirt, then wheeled his horse around, his men following, their hoofbeats fading into the hills. Callie exhaled, her knees trembling, but she didn't falter. She ran to Micah, pulling him close, her heart racing. "You're brave," she whispered up, "but don't scare me like that." Cyrus holstered his revolver, his eyes softening as he joined them. "You both did good," he said, his voice warm. "This place is ours." That night by the hearth, Callie sat with Micah, the quilt draped over them, the fire casting golden shadows. Cyrus handed her a folded paper, its edges worn. "My sister's will," he said. "She wanted this land for someone with heart. That's you, Callie Dalton." He turned to Micah, ruffling his hair. "And you, if you stay." Callie's eyes burned, not with tears but with belonging. She'd found a family, not by blood but by choice. In the late 19th century West, ranches like Cyrus's were more than land. They were lifelines, built by grit and community. Orphans like Callie and Micah often found new families not through law, but through acts of courage and care, shaping the frontier's heart. Allie's claimed her home. But will new faces join this family? Or will the trail bring more trials? Let us know what you hope for next. This tale moved you? Smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell for more Wild West stories. Comment below, what's next for Callie?